Welcome back to AI Meets API, the podcast where we decode the intersection of artificial intelligence and enterprise integration. Joining us today is a leader who's helped companies modernize through integration. Our guest is Harsh Carmarker, AI strategist at MuleSoft. Harsh is an integration strategist with deep experience across API platforms, event-driven systems, and intelligent automation. Hosting today's conversation is Ajay Konda, CGO at ProwessSoft. Over to you, Ajay.
Thanks, Amy. Harsh, it's fantastic to have you on the show. And
Great to be here.
we made a long journey through integration or multiple organizations in the same space. One thing that piqued my attention is your title, AI strategist. The mostly I have seen this title in the consulting organizations. How is it different from there versus your role at MuleSoft?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's very much a field CTO type function, but heavily focused on getting into conversations with our customers and prospects about how to use AI. I think one of the things we've seen is that we get pulled into a lot of conversations that start with the technology, but so often it's worth taking a step back and looking at the strategy around what will make the technology successful versus just diving into features and functions, speeds and feeds, various benchmarks. And so we wanted to position this role to have that conversation not just about the tech, but also around the people and process aspects and what it takes to adopt successfully.
Got it. So you are, if I understand correctly, you will be the bridge between the customers and product in making sure that both are aligned on the direction.
Yeah, so it's kind of a dual role function. The first is ensuring our customers understand where the MuleSoft offerings fit and how they can help them attain various outcomes. But it's also capturing the most recent customer attempts, the newest case studies, and frankly, the most up-to-date requirements and helping close that loop with the product team as well.
So one thing recently I got attention is your blog post um, on the agent sprawl. So that's a topic of interest to many folks. Can you go a little more deep into that? And also another thing I'd like to ask is there are few terminologies very new to me, might be to our listeners also, agent experience, agent card, and a few aspects of the governance you laid out. Can you go a little more detail into what exactly this agent sprawl is all about?
Sure. I'll start with agent sprawl. I think we're at a phase where every organization that sells software, every SaaS company, every hyperscaler, every tool company is trying to raise the value of their offerings by adding an intelligence layer. So regardless of what companies are ready to adopt in terms of AI agents, they're going to find that their vendors and partners are exposing them to agents left and right. So I think the average organization has about 900 different apps. Each of those apps, if they're modern and being updated, is going to have some sort of agentic layer. So there are going to be AI agents all over the organization. And without some sort of unified approach to governance, aspects where you can unify registry, you don't want them just arbitrarily communicating with each other and getting this complex set of sprawling conversations. And that's really what we talk about with agent sprawl. It's not just going to be all the teams in your org developing their own agents, but it's also going to be the agents that show up whether you wanted it or not in the software you buy. So that's really what we're talking about with agent sprawl. Now, the A2A communication protocol really is intended to simplify and standardize the communications between those agents. And that's where the agent card you brought up really comes to play, because it's a way for one agent to communicate to another agent what it can do and how to interact with it. So I think agent cards, agent registries are going to help you at least get control of the sprawl a little bit by deciding which agents can talk and where they find other agents. But there are going to be other layers we're going to need in terms of governance around discovery and just interaction patterns to make sure this doesn't get out of hand.
Okay, sounds interesting. One thing I always have a question is on the context. So the agents, like you said, they're intelligent species. The context is becoming very, very critical compared to the APIs. where governance is more critical, but here along with the governance context is also very critical. How is this approach, what you suggested, going to preserve or put forward that context?
Yeah, so I think once agents have the ability to find and discover tools, agents being able to understand the difference between those tools and how they're used becomes vital. So in early pilots, especially where agents are using MCP to connect to backend tooling, the description of the tool becomes really important to affect how the agent consumes and leverages that tool. And very often in the evaluation and testing cycle, that's one of the things you're updating the most. It's not like back when we were writing APIs where you might have a description, but someone would go look at the technical implementation and service contract. Here, the AI, as it interacts with the tool, is just looking at that description to identify how to use it, and then the examples. Refining how we describe the tools and the language we use is going to be very impactful, and you're going to start to see some more consistency and standards emerge in how people describe downstream capabilities for agents and tools to disambiguate some of those interactions. But I think there's going to be a new big wave, especially around semantics, to help that be more successful.
Yeah, there is so much changing in this space. Few months, I think we need to get upgraded ourselves. And I just remember like a two keynotes back, we were talking about an agent coming in the experience layer, an extra layer of consuming these APIs. Now we are talking about like a multi-agent orchestration. How did this space evolve over the last few years?
Yeah, I think when we first got started with AI experiences and chatbot endpoints, they were very much just putting a natural language, human interactable wrapper over an endpoint. Whether that was a raw system API where you could do simple things like update a specific customer if you knew the ID, or change your phone number if you were interacting with a help bot, now to actually orchestrating experiences across multiple agents where it might be a mix of that experience agent directly calling a tool that exposes a process API, or actually calling out to other agents within other domains that might be handling multi-step processes themselves. I think the biggest thing that's happened is just maturity with what we're seeing with the evolution of agents moving past just those LLM wrappers to things like context management, state management, memory across tool calls, being able to marshal multiple tool calls and pass through credentials. We're seeing agents grow up around the LLMs that power that interaction.
Definitely. One thing that got massive attention from a lot of the folks in the integration world is the MCP and A2A. You spoke a little bit about A2A. Can you go a little more deep into the MCP and how it is evolving with respect to integration?
Absolutely. Integration has always had various endpoints that you could expose for other processes to consume system capabilities that were trapped in backend systems or systems of record. You know, in my early days, we'd do it with COBOL copybooks and fixed with files dropped in a directory, messaging like JMS and Kafka, evolving to SOAP and then eventually RESTful APIs as a standard, gRPC, OData. But for AI agents, you don't want to create a client for each of those downstream connection types. And the underlying implementation of the connection and communication with the backend system should be less important because you want to preserve the ability for the agent to use multiple tools. So MCP has really risen, and MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. It's a protocol that was released by Anthropic. It's really becoming the de facto standard for agents to interact with tools. And what it does is not just provide an interface and abstraction layer to the underlying tool or endpoint, but it provides the description in a meaningful way so that that agent understands how and what to use the tool for. And I think that's what's going to allow agents to scale and consume new capabilities because it's all about a natural language description and then abstracting away some of that underlying communications complexity.
Mhm.
Now, MCP as stands does have some challenges. We always joke that the S in MCP is for security, but a lot of organizations like MuleSoft are layering on constructs and policies that allow you to use authentication and authorization methods that are already going to be within the enterprise. Sorry, and I
So
think you also had a question on A to A. Did I get enough there, or did you want to go deeper
yeah.
into that?
A2A, yeah, I want to come back to that after one more question on the A2A side. One thing that that still I'm not able to get to is the life cycle of the API. Right now, the app life cycle is so even the SaaS applications life cycle is longer. The way the APIs are designed are for a long-term API life cycles, but these agents are coming in. There are two debates are going on that agents still need a long life cycle of the APIs, and there is a need that one of the thing you outlined in your article that these apps are getting built so fast that these MCPs need to be rebuilt or has to be consumed fast. So how does that agent life cycle and API life cycle merge together going forward?
Mm. I think this is one of those velocity conversations that hasn't changed since APIs. You always have one endpoint that's going to reflect the set of capabilities, and that endpoint, you may have teams that just can't version or lifecycle them that frequently to meet changing requirements of the consumer. So there's always this conversation. Now, when you own both sides of the conversation, it's easy. Team A is consuming a backend interface from Team B. So they'll be able to work together to look at release schedules, to look at the different ergonomics and capabilities the API has to support. On the AI side, we're seeing it change so frequently that there is just it's unlikely that the backend teams are going to be able to keep up or even want to keep up with every change on the consuming end. But I think you're going to see the descriptions and the examples and those things in the MCP endpoints evolve much more quickly than the underlying API implementation. Now, if an API isn't sufficient, you're going to need to rev it, you're going to need to bring in more capabilities, but I think you're going to see a lot more orchestration of underlying APIs and people using process APIs or an additional abstraction layer to provide some of those ergonomics for the calling AI agent rather than revving the original API or backend system to meet those needs. Especially if it's things like, an API that was designed for mobile that provided pagination versus the AI agent just needing the full set. So you can start to instrument and add technical shims that more meet those requirements and are going to evolve at the speed of the AI agent rather than the backend system.
Okay, got it. I understand. So in this case, now I have to pivot the same thing to the A2A. How is the A2A is going to play in this life cycle? Will it add another layer of complexity, or will it be helps streamline some of these things?
So I think it's going to help streamline, but I think it's also a point in time interface. So right now, A to A is creating a standardized set of constructs for one AI agent to talk to any other A to A compatible agent. So things like how do you communicate the capabilities? How do you have a standard wireline interface, HTTP, gRPC, JSON? How do you establish a standard for one agent passing a piece of work to another with a task? All those constructs are really important, but they assume a certain type of agentic communication. And I think they're going to have to evolve to support, for instance, more protocols. I think we'll see A to A expand to capture things like evented protocols, just like we did with async API. I think you're also going to see different streaming protocols for things like multimedia and multimodal attachments or just bulk file transfers. So I think that's going to be an interesting space to watch. A2A is currently probably has the most industry weight behind it as an agent to agent protocol, but there are other protocols out there that you see in pockets, like Cisco is backing something called Agency. IBM has agent communication protocol that's really designed around local clusters of agents. And I think we're going to see a proliferation of protocols and then a shrinking back to one or two that are then going to evolve informed by the use cases that spawn those other protocols to begin with. Now, as a part of the Salesforce family, we're very much supporting A2A because we were also involved with Google in the authoring of it.
That's great. Good to know. You have been in the front row seat of the integration all along, right? All throughout your journey, you are mostly involved in the integration side. With all these changes are going on, what trends exciting you most from an integration point of view?
I think from an integration point of view, there are so many consistent patterns that regardless of system endpoints haven't really changed. And it's really exciting to have the ability to now just talk to a natural language interface to scaffold out some of those integrations. If I want to get data from a record-oriented analytical system and put it into a transactional system, I can now describe that verbally to a copilot and a tool like MuleSoft, and it'll scaffold it out. It'll create an API for me. It'll create documentation, and that's all great to streamline the development. But what I find especially interesting and exciting right now is automatically generating tests and then corner case tests. Asking the AI agent, hey, here are the tests I've created. What are some test cases that aren't represented? Test coverage, all of these things that were real grunt work, I can now iterate on super quickly. And I think that's really exciting, especially when you can now run multiple models in adversarial modes against your flows to look for gaps, to look for opportunities to refine. It just shortens that iterative cycle to getting you to better work and better artifacts that much faster.
Okay. Yeah, that's really a pain point right now. We are spending a lot of time. Are there any other pain points which you think in the integration, especially from API professionals' point of view, which are getting fast tracked with respect to by using AI?
Well, I really think, again, testing is huge. I'm interested to see what starts to come up with the operational side and actually optimization around, not just basic control on spinning up and spinning down resources, but actual optimization. And as we get into more agentic workflows, I'm really excited about getting to a point where an agent gets asked for a one-off, executes the workflow, gets asked for a one-off again that it has already been asked for, decides to build a tool, deploy the tool, and then run that tool and wire it with APIs. I think we're going to see some self-organizing and self-constructing systems around industrializing some of those dynamic workflows and building automations that offload the intelligence tasks from the AI to just a traditional automation. And I think that's the next frontier of what we're going to see.
So can you go a little more detail onto this one? How does that, this is very new to me.
So
First time
this
I'm
is
hearing this concept.
this is going to be bleeding edge. I think what we're seeing right now is AI is very good at interpreting a request. And then if it's wired already to call an integration, it can do that. But if you also give it access to tools, you can sequence the calling of tools with an AI agent, where there may not be an explicitly defined process or transactional flow, but you can have that agent communicate back and forth with another agent to perform a complex task. I think what we're going to see is when some of those bespoke task requests or workflows that aren't codified and automated are requested enough times, you'll have AI agents that can then actually go back to the integration platform, generate and deploy a flow, and expose relevant APIs to give themselves tools. Kind of like you can think about somebody using a spreadsheet. You do the same thing 5 times, you create a formula or a pivot table for it. We're going to see that with agents and APIs in the very near future.
Okay. So it might generate just like an idea generation kind of a thing that, okay, you might need this process so that you still need some kind of an approval process to make sure that to get into the production.
Exactly. Very similar to the way agents will write a snippet of code and execute it if you ask them to calculate something. I think you're going to see that actually for generating workflows. I think very much for the near term, there's going to be a human in the loop. There's going to be a testing cycle. There's going to be effort put around it so we don't get Skynet transforming the world into a pile of paper clips. But I think that's going to be the next horizon.
Yeah, I can see that coming. This leads me into the next question onto the deterministic and probabilistic, right? There is a lot of conversation is happening. This is the one you just gave is a great example of converting a probabilistic thing into a deterministic thing. Can you expand on that, how you are seeing it and how you are helping customers on understanding the nuances of it?
Yeah, and this really goes back to that conversation of why we frame this role as an AI strategist. Because, I've talked with a lot of organizations and even senior leaders at organizations who really want to throw AI at every problem, even when it's, fishing with dynamite or whatever metaphor you want to use. It's overkill, where you could just have a button in an app that called an API to bring up customer profile by phone number or email. There are some organizations where they want to build an AI agent because it's cool and you just type to it, but there's a tendency to over-engineer and over-apply AI agents because so many things we do in business are more effective when they're repeatable and executed the same way. If a process is executed differently every time, you can't really measure it and compare the results. Refinements are difficult, repeatability is difficult, scale is difficult, and you're arbitrarily adding cost. So there are a lot of things where I recommend if it can be automated with traditional means, please automate it with traditional means. Save your token costs, save your cloud costs.
Yeah.
Just run a workflow, run a process API, and then if you have those workflows, chain them together with intelligence. Agents decide which of those complete workflows to call. But that way you can reuse the investments you've already made in standard operating procedures, reliable straight-through processing, and of course, transactionality. AI is not great at understanding a transaction and doing a multi-system rollback. Having an automated compensating transaction can be a lifesaver for a lot of these things.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Coming to use cases, right? Are there any use cases which you are excited about, or the things you are currently working on with the customers that you feel are very unique and has a very high value proposition?
Yeah, so this is actually an in-flight customer, so I can't give too many details or the name, but what I found really exciting is they're actually taking customer support conversations and using the unstructured information from those to connect back all the way to the engineering and product team to do things like prioritizing backlog grooming, understanding friction points in the process. Right now, they're actually also investigating if they can have an AI generate reproduction scripts for errors that are seen, where they can hit raw APIs and actually reproduce the situation that caused the error, accelerating resolution and accelerating bug fixes. So we see a lot of customer service bots and agents just doing simple information retrieval or generating tickets. But this is interesting because it's actually linking intelligence on the customer conversation with intelligence around the code base to try and connect those two areas as fast as possible.
That saves so many years of work actually. I can think of how much it can automate, because right now I can see a lot of product teams just sitting going through the data, analyzing it before making into the real time changes into the system. Yeah, that's a very powerful.
I think it's going to be really interesting when you start seeing that connection between product analytics, support metrics, product roadmap, and just understanding friction points. It's a really exciting area, I think, for all SaaS vendors.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big leap. One thing that still I see from a old school or the enterprise organization struggle is application rationalization. We still think that we are sitting on too many applications and stuff. Integration played a key role so far. How do you see it going forward? Integration play a role in the application rationalization? Is something consolidation happening at the same time the evolution of the agents and agentic things are coming up? how do we balance it out?
Yeah, so I think integration has always been key in app rationalization. So you're so often putting a facade in front of the old app, doing some sort of cutover with similar capability. And I think agents can simplify some of the migration of things like schemas, data within the apps, but I don't think traditional integration is going away from that process because there's
Mm-hmm.
always a period where you have to run the old app and the new app or have some sort of cutover. And being able to abstract away those interfaces, put APIs in front of them, just do the bulk data movement, potentially doing canary deploy and traffic shifting. There's always a role for integration in it. But, like always, I think the tech hasn't been the hardest part of it. It's really the stakeholder management and getting alignment because you also need to agree on why certain apps or capabilities matter before the consolidation can even succeed.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a VP that runs their business off of one slice of functionality in a legacy app, you're not going to be able to tear that app out of their hands because it's how they drive their entire business. Taking a step back and starting with what's important for the business is always the start point. And then the technology actually becomes a lot easier. It often just gets back to the strategy and the why we're doing things the way we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. That's the biggest challenge. When it comes to this AI agentic things, right? Adoption is one of the biggest challenge. Twofold question. One is how are you helping customers to increase the adoption of these use cases? Second thing is what kind of metrics you measure during this transition?
Mhm. So I think with adoption, you always have to find the right problem.
Mm-hmm.
Adding an AI agent for an AI agent's sake is part of the reason why, I think that MIT Nanda study just came out that said
Mm-hmm.
95% of AI pilots have failed to deliver P&L impact. This isn't 95% of pilots didn't deliver what they said were going to. It's that they didn't deliver P&L impact. So I think understanding that your pilot, before you get into it, you should have a clear set of outcomes, whether they're employee productivity, customer satisfaction. You should know what lever you're trying to pull to improve what business outcome. And then the second thing for adoption is defining the scope well and creating an end-to-end experience. If
Mm-hmm.
an AI only answers 50% of the use case, even
Mm-hmm.
if it's successful, if I still have to go back into all the other systems for the other half, you won't see a big lift in impact from the AI. If it's shaving 5 minutes off a 10-minute process for Bob, Bob's just going to go grab a cup of coffee in that time. It's if you can really change the way people work, remove a friction point, or accelerate something that lets people do more or interact with the system differently, that's when you'll start to see success and better adoption versus just, oh, now I have to click on this other screen, then go back to the screen I used to be in. So again, it really starts with understanding what you expect the outcome for, testing for it, and tracking those metrics. Is it actually saving time? Is it resulting in more conversions? Is it reducing some conversations that didn't have to happen? The other thing is when you're offloading work to an AI is really good at handling certain types of work, but that means that the high complexity interactions are going to hit the people who used to be doing that task the AI is now doing. So that team's metrics may actually get worse, right? Giving customer success or customer service as an example, your customer service team's call resolution times and first call resolution is going to look worse from a metric perspective if you're now offloading all of the easy questions to an AI. That doesn't mean that that team has gotten worse, but you have to understand and look at those metrics holistically across the various pilots to make sure that you're seeing the right kind of outcomes.
Definitely. One other thing I got picked from the discussion is this summary mentioned semantic and agentic. What is the difference between them? Are they go together or different? How do they work?
So this is going to be one of the most exciting areas for me as we start to see intelligence rise in integration and in just enterprise software. Right now, AIs don't really understand the meaning of words. They interact with words based on how frequently those words are next to other words in the source systems and how much they align with looking like other words. It's very pattern based. So if
Mm-hmm.
I am in finance, my definition of customer might be very different from the definition of customer from a sales team, right? A finance view of customer might require that individual to have a paid relationship, where a sales team might just call anyone they're talking to as a customer.
Yeah.
So across those domains, having a way for an AI to understand what the word customer means is going to be really important. And so I think you're going to start to see semantic layers, layers that help define the meaning of the word in the context of field values or underlying implementations that can explain how the agent should interact with an entity called customer. Those are going to be
Mm-hmm.
really important. Now, historically, we tried to solve a lot of these problems with things like graph DBs and triple stores
Mm-hmm.
for how these concepts are linked. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's going to have to be a lot of research and implementation around that if we're going to see agentic architectures really take over across business domains, because that's where you really run into friction. It's either between organizations or between teams where the meaning of those words can actually have technical implications.
Okay, got it now. So in integration patterns were one of the most prolific thing. When we did a lot of SOA things and stuff, there are patterns. And now there are so much evolution happened. Currently, are there any specific patterns outside MCP and A2A you are seeing which we should get ahead of it?
Yeah, so I think as the number of agents in the enterprise starts to grow, this notion of what constitutes an agent mesh and sort of arbitrary interactions and arbitrary discover and hierarchies of those agentic conversations is going to be really interesting. And it's going to look a lot like workflow patterns that we, used to describe in BPMN and Beeple or Beppel for Pepple, depending how you want to describe them. But describing the interactions between agents up front is going to be something we're going to have to do in the near term until they get sophisticated to make intelligent decisions on how they discover other agents and interact with them. But you're going to see patterns like agent swarms, where you throw one piece of work out through a distribution mechanism to a bunch of agents who will all take and work on different pieces, or who will all try and do the same piece of work. And then you might score outputs and pick one agent versus the other for future execution. I think understanding the interaction and orchestration across large sets of agents is something we're going to have to be very prescriptive about in the near term. So explicit brokering and task distribution. But eventually we'll be able to use things like scoring and rating and costing mechanisms so that agents can intelligently decide how they distribute a piece of work or break up a piece of work.
Okay, that's interesting.
I think you're also going to see that we're going to start to move away from the era of dumb pipes and smart endpoints to where the pipes themselves may actually have to have some intelligence for things like preventing PII leakage or, securing information or limiting opportunities and interactions just based on who's doing the calling in what context.
So you're saying that right now that most of it is controlled at the endpoint level, but it will be controlled even during the actual transformation of the data also has to be governed.
Yeah, I think you'll see where, the definition of what's the endpoint versus what's the pipe is always tricky. People tend to refer to the whole integration as the pipe and then require the source or destination system. We spent a whole lot of time trying to keep business logic in explicit parts of the business so that you wouldn't have logic sprawl and have to dig up 5 different places to figure out what was happening to the data. I think as you start introducing intelligence everywhere, it's inevitable that you're going to have logic sprawl, and a lot of it's going to have to be inferred. So the pipes themselves or the integrations themselves are going to have some controls that are content aware or at least context aware to prevent certain operations as the data is getting transferred, or do things like mask certain fields, and that requires a little bit of intelligence in the integration itself. So how you distribute that business logic is something I don't think we've nailed down and figured out, but it is going to be a challenge for those trying to govern these complex multi-agent interfaces and environments.
Yeah, I can see that. Is there anything I'm missing which you like to share, Harsh, before I wrap it up?
No, I think you've covered a lot of ground. I think just like any technology wave, agentic infrastructure and AI is really exciting. People have a tendency to chase the tech first when we always have to take a step back and ask, am I building something that's already a, resume driven architecture, or am I building something that's actually grounded in a set of business outcomes where this technology is going to help me achieve those business outcomes faster, cheaper, more reliably? And I think that's a big driver between the pilots that succeed and the pilots that don't show business impact. Tech for tech's sake can be fun, but it's tough to get funded long term. It's now about really what is the problem I'm solving, and is this a better way of solving it than the set of tools I already had?
Thank you so much, Harsh. Thanks for your time. It's been very valuable. I learned a lot of new things from you.
Thanks. This was a lot of fun.
That's all for this episode of AI Meets API. Thanks for tuning in and being part of the conversation. Be sure to follow so you don't miss future episodes. Until next time, stay curious and stay connected.